Okay, and also closed captioning. I believe someone had requested closed captioning. Okay. Okay. So welcome everyone. Good evening. My name is Stephanie Babbitts, and I am the project coordinator from SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. Joining me this evening are my colleagues, Beth Cosentino from the START Project, Brenda Figueroa from the START Project, as well as Carolina Rodriguez. We're also joined this evening by CADRE, our guest presenters this evening. I'll introduce in a little bit later, but we have Manny Gwendolyn here and Dr. Melanie Reese. So moving right along here. And so we want to thank you for joining us today. Brenda, are you?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, great. So we have Brenda who is also ready to translate. So during today's meeting, our team member Brenda Figueroa will assist with English and Spanish interpretation.
Sí, buenas tardes. En esta noche yo voy a ser la persona que va a estar asistiéndolos con la interpretación al español.
Along the bottom of your screen, you are going to see several icons. Well, you will see several icons, one of which is a globe labeled interpretation. This is currently not turned on yet.
En la parte posterior de su pantalla van a ver icono de un globo terráqueo, que es lo que le va a indicar para tener acceso a la interpretación simultánea al español. Esta opción todavía no la hemos encendido. Continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I ask, please click on the globe icon.
Cuando ella le indique, van a oprimir el globo terráqueo.
You will then select your preferred language, English or Spanish.
Y entonces van a seleccionar su idioma de preferencia, ya sea inglés o español.
Even if you do not require interpretation, you must select a language.
Aunque no requieran interpretación, deben seleccionar un idioma.
When you do this, you will hear the meeting in the language you have chosen.
Cuando haga esta opción, van a escuchar entonces la presentación en el lenguaje que escogieron.
If you choose Spanish, you can also click mute original audio, so you will not hear the English version at all.
Si seleccionan el español, pueden hundir la opción mute original audio, que quiere decir para silenciar el audio original. De esta manera no tienen que escuchar los dos idiomas a la vez y solamente escuchan el español.
Now, as shown on the screen, please click on the globe icon and select either English or Spanish. Give you a
Ahora
moment.
ya va a prender la opción y seleccionen su idioma.
Okay. Okay, has it turned on? Okay, thank you, Beth. And okay, so it's there. Okay, so we are good. Brenda, can you just give me a flag or some sign that we're good? Thank you. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about SPAN. SPAN's projects and programs for parents of children from birth to age 26 and for women of childbearing age extend to over 20 national, regional, and local programs funded by government agencies, foundations, and fee-for-service contracts. These programs cover education, health and mental health, human services, childcare, and child welfare. Our mission is to empower and support families and inform and involve professionals interested in the healthy development and education of children and youth. Our foremost commitment is to children and families with the greatest need due to disability or special health, mental health needs, poverty, discrimination based on race, ethnicity, gender, language, immigrant or homeless status, involvement in the child welfare or juvenile justice systems, geographic location, or other special circumstances. This workshop tonight is presented to you by START, Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities Project. We are a partnership between the New Jersey Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. We offer programs and services that support the engagement of families to improve outcomes for students, including developing and sustaining special education parent advisory and support groups in communities and school districts. Assistance is available for schools and districts and for parents and parent leaders to enhance family engagement to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. Through workshops, regional meetings, and parent leadership development activities, we help parents and parent leaders to become informed and active participants in their child's education, to partner with educators in improving educational programs for students with disabilities, particularly in the area of inclusion, to start and strengthen special education parent advisory groups or CPAGs, and with the goal to increase effective family engagement to improve special education programs, policy, and practices in school districts and communities. So this evening, a little bit of an overview. First, we're going to reflect on the experiences that you may have with the IEP process. Then we will have our guest presenters talk about and identify communication strategies with their presentation. And then at the end, we will have a few minutes at the end for questions and reflection. Beth?
Hello, everyone. Good evening. So we're going to set the stage a little bit here for this evening's webinar. We have these statements, and you're welcome to drop your comments in the chat box and as I read through them. So let's start with, I feel like an equal member of the child study team when discussing least restrictive environment or inclusion. So you can comment in the chat and let us know your thoughts on that. And I'll keep going to the next one. I understand the district's position, and I believe they understand mine. Do you feel that's true? Not true? And the third one, I am able to work through barriers in my child's IEP meeting in a collaborative way. So
Great.
we'll look at our comments a little bit here. Thank you, Allison. Mostly yes to the first. That's good to hear.
Anyone else?
All right, we'll keep going then.
Okay.
You can
All
always
right.
comment as we go too.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that, Beth.
Sure.
So when we were thinking about tonight's presentation, one of the fun things that our team does is we love to brainstorm, and we take a lot of our we draw a lot of our content and material and ideas for our workshops based on our own personal experiences, as parents of children with disabilities, and just navigating the system and being able to effectively advocate for our children. So whether it's through inclusion or literacy or parent group work that we do on our team, we always kind of have an opportunity to think about and find the commonality that when we're talking about our issues, that we find other families and parents might be, or caregivers might be experiencing some of the same things. So that's kind of setting the stage for tonight. Those questions that Beth asked were things that we were talking about, that we go through with our IEP meetings. And oftentimes we find that when we're going to IEP meetings, that we sometimes bring baggage from an old IEP meetings as we go into a new IEP meeting. And so a quote that we came across that was kind of relevant for this evening was, "Don't bring baggage from an old relationship into your next relationship unless you want it to be a short trip." And so when we think about the baggage, we think about frustration. Could it be personalities? Other things like fear, when we're looking at some baggage that you bring into your IEP meeting. Mistrust, the need to win, and then misinformation. So some of these things that come in that kind of creep into IEP meetings that are just based from baggage that you bring in. And just so tonight we want to think about are these applicable to you? Have you found yourself in that situation? And what are some strategies to work through that? So with that, I would like to introduce our guest presenters for this evening. Dr. Melanie Reese enthusiastically joined CADRE as director in 2017, coming from the Idaho Department of Education, where she was the dispute resolution coordinator for 7 years. There, she oversaw the state's IDEA mediation, state complaint, and due process hearing systems, and helped grow the IEP facilitation program into a popular option for Idaho's districts and parents. Working collaboratively with the State Parent Center and local school districts, Dr. Reese actively fostered relationships to better serve children with disabilities. Manning Gwendolay joined CADRE as the Executive Program Assistant in December of 2022, with a 12-year background as a classroom teacher and youth services librarian. With a master's in language and communication and the drive to be a lifetime learner, Manny continues to build a unique skill set that makes him a better communicator, educator, writer, and technical project assistant. CADRE, the National Center on Dispute Resolution in Special Education, supports state education agencies, lead agencies, and federally funded parent centers in building local level capacity to prevent and resolve disputes, and developing more effective and equitable dispute resolution systems. We are very pleased to have them here this evening. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing for a moment and pass it over to Melanie and Manny, and if you want to go ahead and share.
I'd love to. I need to be given permission to share. It's disabled for me.
Okay, well, I think what I would do then is make you a co-host. And with that, you can go ahead and share.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And feel free, as they're presenting, anyone can go ahead and drop your questions in the chat box. Take it away,
Great, thanks.
Melanie.
All right. Actually, I'm going to hand it off to Manny first. So thank you very much for inviting us. And Manny, go ahead.
All right. Wow. Thank you for the introduction. I really want to stress and kind of piggyback on some of that luggage that was mentioned earlier. I want to go ahead and lead into our presentation with the Swahili proverb, and that is, when elephants fight, the grass beneath them dies. And I really like this because it frames an idea of what we think about conflict. And we can imagine two elephants duking it out. But what we really don't think about is what everything else is having affected by such a bout and a feat of strength as two elephants were to fight. When we often think about conflict, we think of an A versus B scenario where you have two people or two parties working in some sort of controlled environment, like an arena or a boxing ring or something like that. But when those elements are controlled, it's only the two parties that really are in effect with one another or are being affected. When you take it outside of a controlled environment, conflict has a wider effect on the elements and the environment around it. And here we see it depicted in this quote. And I kind of wanted to give it to the chat here and see how everyone thinks about, or what everyone thinks the grass signifies in regards to IEPs and the whole process, as well as inclusive-based decisions for students as they go into the main classroom. So I'll just give it to the chat here and tell me what you think the grass is in this quote.
There. Oh. Someone said, let's see, education.
Mhm.
Let's see, the care of the children, the product of the IEP. And Allison said, I love both analogies given. The graphs to me seems like the relationship between the team and the family.
And the relationships of the
Yep.
IEP members, correct. All of those things are fantastic responses to this because they all fit. Often when we think about conflict, we think about who won or what was gained, but really we don't ask ourselves what is affected by the conflict itself. And in that regard, in the rest of this presentation, I would like for all of us to consider the grass as we talk about conflict. All right, the next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about the nature of conflict. We're talking about 2 strategies for improving communication, which is separating the people from the problem and identifying issues, positions, and interests. And then we will also discuss some of CADRE's resources that we have to offer to both parents and parent centers. And with that, I'm going to give the mic to Melanie.
Thanks, Manny. Sorry about that. Thanks, Manny. So I just love this little baby picture. This is so much fun. I wish it were my kid. Not right now, though, because mine are grown and I don't have to deal with little babies. But a lot of times in conflict, we are surprised it happens. And so what we want for you to take away from this particular slide is the idea that conflict happens. And when we care about something very deeply, like, oh, I don't know, our children, or our jobs, or things that we hold true and valuable to us, the more we care about something, the more likely when we are feeling thwarted or something comes into disagreement with us about how we think it should unfold, the more likely we're going to experience that thing called conflict, which is a perception of interference that we have that is taking place, right? That we feel that something is interfering with our ability to engage. So one element for us to move forward and be productive and ready for conflict is to expect that if we care about something and somebody else cares about something, the more we care about, the more likelihood that conflict is going to erupt if we have some kind of disagreement about it. And that's okay. To normalize conflict, to normalize the experience of conflict is part of preparing ourselves for an event. Conflict is normal, it is natural, and it is to be expected, particularly when we care deeply about something. And again, what could we care more about than our children? The education of our children, the progress of our children, and the happiness and well-being of our children. So conflict happens. So I want you to take just a moment and think about some conflict that you have been in. And it can be in a school relationship or scenario, or it can be with a partner, it could be with a friend, it doesn't really matter. But just put yourself in that mind of some conflict that you've experienced and think about how it felt. I'd like for you to toss into the chat some words for me to just describe that conflict. What were some feelings that came to mind? What were some experiences? What was the impact? What emotions did you have? So just toss out some words. Let's popcorn out some words of frustration. Good. Some words of overwhelming. Anger. What did it look like? Not heard. Heartbreak. Frustration. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I have done this particular activity, and just about every presentation I do about conflict, and it is a common experience for folks to talk about the challenge and the frustration and the hurt feelings and the fear and frustration that folks experience. This is a common way in which people address the memory of a conflict. It's not a fun place to be. There's anxiety that goes along with it, and it isn't a pleasant place to be in that moment of conflict. But I want to draw your attention to the other side of conflict, and I present to you a dual approach or a dual focus of conflict. And if we look at the Chinese characters of conflict, you'll see that the symbol for conflict is the symbol for danger and opportunity, and they're superimposed upon one another to represent what conflict is. The symbol of danger and the symbol of opportunity are superimposed to mean conflict. And it's a representation that conflict, yeah, it has those dangerous elements of, yeah, there's fear and frustration, and that can be kind of a dangerous thing. We might have hurt and a relationship that are in danger, and frustrations ahead, and it's something to be cautious of. But there's also gifts that can be there. And can you identify for me some possible gifts that conflicts offer? What are some positive things that can result in conflict? Go ahead and toss some of those in the chat for me. What are some positive things that can result because we've conflicted? Finding your inner strength, understanding. Excellent. Beth, I have done this activity for 20 years. I have never had anybody say finding your inner strength.
It was
Excellent.
me.
Another, yes, good
It was
job.
me.
Another viewpoint. Yeah, good for you. Another viewpoint, clarity, opportunity for learning other people's views, self-awareness, improved communication. Wonderful. One of my favorite games is to play Guess What Melanie Has on Her Slide, and you guys are doing a great job, because guess what's next? My slide of conflict is dangerous, but it holds a lot of opportunities. It holds opportunities of clarification. It holds an opportunity for us to heal past hurt. It holds opportunities for understanding and moving forward. And it has gifts of creativity. You know, maybe we can come up with something that we hadn't thought about before and problem solve and grow in our relationship and maybe improve and strengthen our organization or our time together. So, you know, as we talk forward about ways in which we can encourage productive conflict, think about these opportunities as something that we can strive for. So I'll hand it back to Manny.
Okay. I love this image. It reminds me of how 2 years ago I got invited to go to a rage room where they gave us a bunch of tchotchkes and things that were breakable, and then some hammers. And we just got to destroy everything in the room. But the interesting thing about it was that about 10 minutes into this hour allotment that we had to just lay waste to these things, I got really tired really quickly. And the reason is because I brought my emotions into that room to play with them and to get them out. But what I learned was that it's just like this quote, dealing with emotions is hard. It really is. You end up taking a lot of your emotions just drain you. And on top of that, they can kind of get the best of you. And Melanie said it earlier that, you know, we tend to get more passionate about the things we truly care about. And that brings up the next little message on this slide. And that's high emotions increase when an outcome holds critical importance to us. And a lot of us have the same thing in common in this webinar, that we're all here because we want to help children with disabilities, whether they are ours or they're someone else's. We're definitely here to do that. And because that is the mission, we can stir up a lot of emotions and a lot of tension. And, you know, sometimes it can make us feel very ineffective. in what we're trying to get done. And my next slide is going to talk really about how some of the pitfalls of bringing our baggage, or that luggage that we were talking about earlier, or that was presented, and how it can escalate resolution or escalate conflict and make resolution far more difficult, or in my opinion, I believe it can really just ruin it, and it can make resolution impossible. So I wanted to talk about a few of those things. And really the one thing that I want to say is they all have the same thing in common. They recenter the issue, which when we show up into an IEP meeting, or we show up to talk about our children, the whole center is on our children. But when we let our emotions and all of that luggage pack in with us, unfortunately, now we're all worried about holding all that luggage, and that luggage gets us tired and frustrated, and we forget about the reason that we're there. And that's, of course, to serve our children. However, I want to look at a few of those real quick. And the first one is that tactics go from light to heavy. Once we have it in our mindset, and before I go any further, this is not just a parent's perspective of I'm doing this. Anyone who shows up to an IEP meeting can bring in their own baggage and escalate conflict and make resolution nigh impossible. So tactics can go from light to heavy. If someone feels unseen or misheard, then they might put up barriers. And once they put up barriers, something that could be resolved in a small conversation, all of a sudden sounds like something that an attorney should handle. And all that does is wear out our emotions, our pocketbooks, and our resources. And that's for everyone, not just a parent, but also the district or a student or a teacher, all of that. It starts to wear on them. The next form is how positions become polarized. Once we feel that there is that luggage is now too heavy for us to gain, we drop it and we start to say, I'm right. I know the solution and no one else does. And again, this recenters the problem from the child's needs to a situation where I am correct about something and I need someone else to relent and change and be, and suffer the loss. The next one is issues expanding. This is something where frustration can bring up not just one issue, where you could go into an IEP meeting to talk about one-on-one assistance for your kid during math class, but instead it turns into all of the different things in there. Like I now want to talk about, or someone gets upset and they want to talk about transition times or lunch periods or recess or transportation issues. And now all of these problems are on the table. But the one thing that really needed to happen was we needed to talk about one-on-one instruction in that math class. And if we talk about all of these other things, no resolution is going to happen. The next one is kind of similar, but instead of issues expanding, they actually generalize. So imagine while you're having that dispute about the one-on-one instruction and all of that time, maybe a letter goes home and it doesn't reach it, it doesn't reach, or maybe the email address that the administrator had was not the right form of communication to talk to the parent. And then all of a sudden the issue does not stay on the one-on-one instruction. Instead, now it expands to all these general issues, and it's not the student anymore. It's now the inability for the school to communicate with its parents, and that has to be fixed. But again, now we're talking about something big and general instead of actually talking about the original problem. And the last one that we want to look at is that motivations change. And when motivations change, this is, again, the frustrations of not being heard, not being seen, having some sort of misunderstanding, and all of a sudden it leads to a motivation where I want to start doing something well, but now I really want to win. And oh, I've been wrong 3 times now? No, 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 no. I need to teach someone a lesson about how they're doing things wrong and how I'm right. And unfortunately, yes, you might solve that problem of teaching someone a lesson, but again, the student here still needs that help on that one-on-one instruction in math. And we've got to find a way to get to that point. And with that, I wanted to talk about how on the next slide, we've got Melanie with an inquiry mind, with setting an inquiry mind.
Well, you're welcome. Take it if you want to, Manny. So, we're talking about, having your emotions and letting them get the best of you, and changing the nature of conflict towards escalation. How do we turn it back toward de-escalation? How do we change conflict to a place where we can be more productive rather than letting it get out of control? And I used to sit in a place, at the State Department of Education, where I would have both district folks as well as parents contacting me, telling me their story. And it would be, for whatever the situation was, the other person isn't hearing, or the other person is, we have this situation and it's not going well. And it didn't matter what the issues were. It just was, we just have this situation and we can't work it out together. And, the same tools that I would share with a district, I would share with a parent. It's the same way of changing the tone. The same tools can be used by anybody. And a key one is that how to approach a scenario by adopting an inquiry mind. How do we get to understanding what the actual concerns are? Instead of going in with your reaction and your frustrations leading the charge, how do we go in to find out what is really happening, so we can let that creativity come true, and we can find out, we can learn from the other. So there are some just mental maps that you can adopt. So one is, before reacting, you know you're feeling it in your heart. You know that something's coming up. You're expecting it because it's there, right? Conflict happens. Don't be surprised by it. You've experienced before. You know it's there. But before you react to it, take a breath and the opportunity to make sure you've got the whole story. We have a tendency as human beings to assume that we know the whole story. We've seen it before. It's part of that baggage, right? We know we know one teacher. We know all teachers, right? So therefore, we know the entire story. This is our chance, before reacting, to ascertain from the other party their experience first. And listening is one way to do that. And before critiquing, before finding fault, clarify. Make sure that you understand the situation as it is. As I understand it, this is, you mentioned that we were going to do back and forth writing in the communication book, and I haven't seen the communication book for a few days. And my understanding is it's going to be written every day. I haven't seen it for a couple of days. As I understand, you've mentioned that there was an assembly and there were other things. I'm just going to listen. I understand. I'm just going to clarify that the reason why the communication book wasn't filled out was because of an assembly, and that you were gone for a couple of days because of a substitute. Now I understand. I could critique. I could say, why didn't you put it in the lesson plans to add to the? I could critique, but right now I'm just going to clarify that I get it. It doesn't mean that there's not, critique to happen, but I'm going to first clarify that I have the entire picture. The ability to clarify sets the stage for problem solving. And then before demanding, again, make sure that you understand. A little secret, and this is coming from somebody who's done mediation for 25 years, you are going to get a lot further in being heard and making sure that your interests are met if you can demonstrate that you understand where the other party comes from. You will get further in making sure that you are understood if you understand. A true secret. And so we're going to take those hints and move us into some tools. Handing it back to Manny.
Mm-hmm. All right, and really, it's, you know, thank you, Melanie. The reframing of everything, of your mindset as you approach conflict is definitely the theme of these tools that we're going to talk about today. And so today we're going to talk about the communication toolbox involving separating the person from the problem. Then we're going to look at separating interest or positions from interest, and then striving for interest-based discussions. And again, all three of these happen when you yourself approach conflict from a different perspective. And once you do that, everything kind of will fall into the way. And with that, let's look at the next slide, because this scenario that I want to talk about it's true to my heart. But when people disagree, they often see the other person as the problem. And I have a wonderful example for how this gets displayed in my house. I live with my two best friends, and on top of that, we all three work from home. So we're constantly around one another. And we do well, we really are great. But there is a moment in the morning where everything can be tense. And that's when we all show up to make our coffee. And we're very particular about coffee. We all like different ways. I'm an AeroPress fan. My roommate likes the French press. My other roommate likes the pour over. We have different grinders. We have one electric kettle that we have to replace almost every year because we use it so much. But we also have a wonderful kitchen and a tiny, tiny space to make coffee. And that is our battleground, we have learned. In the mornings, when we have the most baggage for all three of us, we often look at that coffee spot and we see the mess that's there and the beans that are out and the grounds that are on the table, or maybe a little bit of water, and it irks all three of us. And we instantly point fingers at one another and make the situation one of the other people and their problem that they're causing us. So it's so quick to point fingers, and especially in the morning. But one of the things that we've had to learn over the years, because we've lived together for over 5 years and we made it through COVID, so we must be doing something right. But we realized that we had to frame the situation where we have a tiny space for coffee. And it is up to all of us, if we're going to enjoy our coffee, we have to maintain that space well. But what it took was us stopping to point fingers at one another. Let's hit the next slide. Because after we reframe the situation, we put the problem, our messy coffee space, on the table, and we stepped away from it. And we realized that we all three had to work together to make that space work so that we all could sit down and enjoy our coffee, and then enjoy one another later in the evening when it's time to watch TV and break bread together and eat. Because if we didn't, our household would not function. We had to take that element of looking at a situation and realizing that the person next to us is not the problem. That's not the person. That's not what it's caused. That's actually an ally for me to change the scenario and look and go, how do we fix this problem? And you can take this tactic into an IEP meeting because, again, you're all there for the success of the children or for the child in question. You're all there for that success and you all want to work together. But it's that baggage, it's the emotional ties, and it's the inability for us to change our mindset because of our emotions that makes it difficult to see the other person as anything else but the problem. But once you do, then you have an ally and you two can work together to solve the problem at hand, which of course is getting the best education for your child possible. And with that, I give it back to Melanie.
All right, so I'm going to pretty quickly, but hopefully in a thorough way, share with you a way to break down some of the elements of conflict and how to identify issues so that they can be worked through. So we're going to talk about separating positions from interests. So anytime we come into a conflict, we have what we want and we have what we need, right? And we oftentimes, particularly in the way in which our society approaches conflict, we identify first what we want. If we're going to purchase a car and we are going into a car dealership, we identify how much we are willing to spend. That is a position. That is how much we want to spend. If we are going into to buy a house, we do the same thing. We are going to spend in this range. That is a position. But what is that? What is underlying that? What is the need? Why do we have a particular range? Well, because we don't want to be house broke, right? We don't want to spend more than we have or that we can afford. We don't want to have payments that are more than we can be comfortable because we also need to eat. And we need to be able to afford clothing. We occasionally might want to go to a movie or, maybe feed our children, just little things. So we have, when we go into a negotiation or a conflict event, we have positions and we have interests. And it's oftentimes that people mix or mesh up those two, and they don't understand that they're separate. And we can either argue from positions, or we can negotiate from interests. And I'll explain those a little bit more. So this idea of positions versus interests can be looked at as but by thinking of a iceberg. So imagine the Titanic coming along thinking, oh, I see some little ice above the surface. That's not very big, no problem. I will just go around it. But lo and behold, underneath the surface, there's a whole bunch more ice that causes a lot of danger. So bam, they hit it and they sink because they weren't paying attention to what was below the surface. Well, above the surface, what they saw were the positions. They saw the tip of the iceberg, if you will, the wants, the above the surface positions. And above the surface, you have the demands that people make. You have the expectations that people have. You have the solutions that people offer. So back to my buying a car, there's I'm not going to pay any more than this amount. There's the expectation that my payment's not going to be any more than this. There's the solution that I have. This is the reading program that we're going to be using, or this is how many minutes of PT is going to be offered. Okay, those are the solutions, positions. But underneath the surface are the needs, and the needs are fueled by the values that people hold, or the fears that people have, or the beliefs that exist. They're what people must have in order to be satisfied. So back to the car example, the needs are, I need to have a budget that I'm comfortable working within, right? I need to feel comfortable and not be overextended. Let's take it into another situation. Or let me explain it a different way. So positions are the solutions that people offer. Most people enter into a conversation or a conflict or a negotiation positions first, position forward. And they will, you can hear them when they say words like, I expect, I want, you should, you must, this is what must happen. Positions are very easy to identify, and that's what people start with. The interests, you have to dig for. It's usually through the conversation. It's usually through people telling their story or talking a little bit about what's going on for them, or how they've been impacted by the situation so far, or what's going on for them. Interests are the motivations that underlie why they're asking for something. You'll hear an interest by words like I need, or I value, or I fear, or I hope. Let's take an example. You've got a dad and a kid. Okay, so dad is saying, son, you have a curfew of 10 o'clock and I expect you to be home by 10 o'clock. So therefore, I don't care that it's you've got something special that you want to have, you will be home by 10 o'clock, even though you would like to be home by 2 o'clock in the morning. Kid comes, dad says, I want to be home by 2. This, just a special event for me, dad. I really want to be home by 2 on Friday morning. Can I? Dad's like, nope. You have a 10 o'clock curfew. We're sticking to it. What are dad's possible positions? Dad's position is be home at 10. That's the solution that he's offered. But what are some possible interests that he has? Go ahead and toss them in the chat. What are some possible interests? What could dad be fearing? What could he be wanting? What are his needs? It's not safe. Roads aren't safe. Yet roads are less safe at that hour. What does he fear? And somebody wants to tell me that nothing good happens after midnight. Dad wouldn't be able to sleep if he had to wait up for his son. Again, playing guess what Melanie has on the slide. Here are the answers that came up. Safety, worry about bad choices being made, want to be a responsible parent. What would other people think if I let my kid come home at 2 o'clock in the morning? It's important to have boundaries, to be a good parent. I don't want my son to turn out like his older brother. Okay? But on the other hand, you got the son, right? And the son is definitely, he's definitely asking about this trust. The son's like, I want to be home at 2 a.m. That's the son's position. But some interest underlying it might be, I want to have fun. My friends are going out. They're staying out until 2. I don't want to be controlled. Freedom, independence. Maybe the concert doesn't get out until 1 o'clock, and maybe I'll be chaperoned. I don't know. Peer approval, social interaction, time away from home. And the concert doesn't end until late. So if we focus on positions, the only way to win, as Manny was talking about before, is through power, right? It's through competition. One person's going to win, one person's going to lose. Dad's going to pull the power card, or the kid's going to pull well, I can do what I want, and you can punish me later if you want to. And that's, it's going to be a competition of wills, a battle of wills, right? But if we focus on interest, hey, I'm concerned about safety. Well, Dad, I know you're concerned about safety. Maybe we can talk about how to meet your safety needs and still allow me to go to the concert. Maybe we can talk about having a little bit of room for me to, we can work through interest, and it allows us to be more creative. And so interest-based approach is a way for us to, again, change the frame. And here are some questions about that we can use to try to get to some of those interests. How has this affected you? What do you think will happen if I stay out until 2? What are your concerns? Or if I'm midnight 10, how does that solve just questions that get to what the solution is doing, or what do I need? Take it back to an
Melanie, can I just
inclusion
ask a quick question about that last slide?
Sure.
I just had a quick question about that. Would
Sure.
you say that those are questions that I think would be good to ask in an IEP meeting?
You know, as a facilitator, certainly. I know that, you know, you're coming from a facilitator perspective, but I think that we all have the ability to focus on interest. And so, yes, if somebody is saying, you know, we are going to offer 30 minutes of OT services or speech therapy, a question to ask to get it moving from a position to an interest could be, can you talk to me how you came up with 30 minutes and what 30 minutes is and what that does? I need a little bit more information to talk about why 30 minutes instead of 20 or 45. I need to understand what that does, you know, and yeah, I think that you can move that forward.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. And to bring it back to the inclusion, another example that we can use in inclusion, a position of more inclusion in the general education classroom could be a position where the interest could be social growth, academic rigor, and belonging. Could be some interest behind requesting more inclusion, where some interest behind saying, you know, less time in the general education classroom. The interest behind that could be, well, with, you know, individualized attention and progress in the curriculum is a concern, or readiness. And if we're arguing or debating inclusion versus non-inclusion, there's only two solutions there, right? But if we're talking about readiness and progress, and you know, there's lots of creativity that we could have. And we're talking about meeting belongingness needs. You know, it allows for more creativity. I'd love to go back to the previous slide, but I have 1 minute left to wrap this up. So
it's okay. You know what? It's fine. Melanie, if you need time, take time. It's okay. Because this is such great and rich information. And I really, so if you need 10 minutes, take 10 minutes. It's fine.
Well, I'll wrap this up and then we'll come back to some questions. How's that?
Yeah.
So just generally speaking, you know, interest-based problem solving is where the interest becomes the joint concern. It's the idea of putting the problem, the interest, on the other side of the table, like Manny was talking about. How can we meet the interest of belonging and the interest of readiness? How can we meet both of those interests at the same time, right? You know, or how can we meet your need for safety, Dad, and your need, you know, for some freedom at the same? You know, how can we do this? That's an interest-based, putting the problem on the other side of the table. Interest-based problem is changing the but to and. How can we do this and that? Right. So that's what we're moving toward. Is it as a change of frame? And so as you told me I could, I'll go back to that previous slide. Is this the slide you wanted me to go back to, Sherelle? Or was it this slide?
I think it was the one I had the questions about.
No, it was.
This slide?
Was it this one?
No, the next one.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that one. Thank you.
Sure. These slides are going to be available to you. Did you have a question about it?
Actually, it just is very helpful because it's exactly where I am right now. And my question really is just like the best approach for us to have a positive collaborative effort together to meet the needs of the students. So this is helpful. Thank you.
Sure. So a way that you can frame a question about inclusion can be, how can we meet social growth needs and interests and progress in the curriculum? Or how can we meet the belonging need and academic rigor and, you know, your concern for readiness and the individualized attention? So focusing instead of inclusion or not inclusion is not going to is kind of hard. It's either going to be one or the other. There's not a lot of creativity that can happen there. Does that make sense?
I believe so. It sounds like you're saying, like, try to focus on
more of the goals or the outcomes that we want versus the actual
Really.
item that we're looking for?
If we focus on positions, it's going to be a competition. If we focus on interests, we're focusing on the needs, and we can be more creative. And it might be we try something for a little while, and then maybe we have to go back and try something. You know, we're trying to move forward. We're trying to make progress. And as a facilitator of IEP meetings, you know, this is all about trying to move forward and make progress. Right. I want to point you to a few of the materials that CADRE has if you're interested in learning more. We have some resources, so you can go to CADRE Works, and we have a For Families page. We have on that page are a whole bunch of resources that you can identify, and I know that they're going to be handed out as well. We have some videos, Tale of Two Conversations, that talk about some ways in which to present information, a bad example and a good example, great tools in here, as well as a 5-course presentation that you can take online courses on IEP meetings, listening, managing, responding to emotions, focusing on interests. So, and then finally, I just want to let you know we have an upcoming webinar on legal issues presented by Art Shinozia that everybody's invited to, and it's also going to be in Spanish. So I'm going to let you close. So give you 2 minutes.
Thank you for that, Melanie. That was really great information. And what and so for the participants tonight for this workshop, once you complete the evaluation, and we'll be dropping the link in just a moment to the evaluation, you will then receive a link to the resources, and our resources include many resources that we have, our SPAN resources, but then also the CADRE work, CADRE resources. I have to say, A Tale of Two Conversations is a must-watch video, especially if you have an IEP meeting coming up very soon, or just, it is a great video. The first video shows, I was watching it and I was like, wow, I think we've all had that type of IEP meeting, or that type of conversation where you left like, throwing your arms up in the air and saying like, what just happened? Versus a very productive, collaborative conversation. So I really highly recommend watching it. As Jeanette said in the comment, it's a great mock-up, conversation to have of the IEP meetings, do and don'ts. Yeah, it's an exactly. It's a do and don'ts for IEP meetings. So really, really wonderful resources that we have included with that. With that said, I do want to take a few minutes now, if anyone does have questions about what we were talking about this evening. The video, it's going to be in the resources once you complete the evaluation, and Beth can go ahead and drop the links in the chat box to our evaluations. We have an evaluation, a link in English or a link in Spanish, and if you could just take a moment and fill that out, and then you'll get the access to the folder with all of the resources, which includes the CADRE resources. But does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask a question, or drop a question in the chat box right now?
I saw that Iona had a question that she presented into the chat. Would you like to talk about that?
Let me see. I missed it, so let me take a look.
It was right above the reflection form.
Oh, got it. If a student is interested in general education inclusion and the IEP team is against inclusion, how should student present their position or interest? Got it.
So I guess the first question is, so the question is what are we talking about when we talk about inclusion? I might try to unpack what that means. So are we talking about inclusion in one class? Are we talking about inclusion in the math curriculum? Are we talking about full inclusion, or full separation from the general education curriculum? Are we talking, what does that mean? And I would guess I would ask a team to unpack what inclusion means. and get some kind of definition of what are the variables of inclusion or exclusion. And I might even get away from that terminology, because I think that it may not be helpful, and start talking about the elements of it. I think I would talk about what the needs are instead of the term inclusion or exclusion. Say, I have some concerns, and think about your own needs. Why are you looking for more inclusion? What is it that you're looking for? Is it because you are fearful that the child is not getting as much social time? Or are you concerned that they're falling behind academically? Or what is it that you are needing that you believe is going to be fulfilled by the position of conclusion? And talk about that need getting met. So instead of the solution of inclusion, talk about the need getting met. And as the school district talks about their position, reframe it to an interest. And see if you can start focusing on an interest-based discussion rather than a position-based discussion. And you can change that yourself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was great. Anyone else have any other questions or comments? Anyone? I can't see if someone has their hand up from my screen. Anyone? No? It's Wednesday. I get it. It's hump day. All right. Well, what we'll do is, as Beth went ahead and dropped the link, and then real quick, some other information in the folder of the resources. So there will be the resource, a list of all of the resources, and then there's a couple of flyers that we have in the folder. One of the tools that we have in there is our texting program for literacy. So if you're interested in signing up to receive weekly text messages every Wednesday at around 3 o'clock, you get a text message from our team with a tip of the week pertaining to literacy. And it's great for how you can engage your child at home around early literacy. Next is we also have our workshop on starting and running an effective special education parent advisory group. We actually tomorrow have our session at noon. Registration is still open for that workshop if you're interested in learning more about starting and running a parent group. So we have that, and then weekly we have our office hours. So that is where you can pop in on Zoom on Friday mornings at 10 o'clock and receive some technical assistance directly from either myself or Beth or Brenda, someone from our team, regarding any questions that you have about your special education parent advisory group. And so those flyers are in the resource folder as well. So with that, if there are no other questions or comments, last chance? No? Okay. I would like to thank Melanie and Manny for participating and attending and presenting tonight. Some wonderful information. We are so glad that you made yourself available to present tonight and gave us great information. And I guess that's a wrap. So thank you to everyone for attending, and have a wonderful evening. Take care.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. So